And let us know where you're joining us in the chat. I know our panelists would love to know who they're talking to and where everyone is from. Okay, I'm going to give a few more seconds for people to come in. I see California. Welcome, California. New York, Michigan, bunch of New York, North Carolina, Wisconsin. Fantastic. Keep letting us know. We've got all areas of New York are covered tonight. We've got Ohio, New Jersey, Tennessee. Welcome, everyone. Keep coming in. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So my name's Sam Fletcher. I am the Executive Director for the New York State chapter of NASW. Welcome to our chapter chat tonight. I hope you're as excited as we are to listen to our panelists and learn more about different ways you can be involved in social work. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping things before we get started. First of all, I want to thank our intern, Mike McLaughlin, who is joining us tonight. He is the one who came up with this idea and did all the planning for it and really worked with us to make sure this happened. So thank you, Mike, for all your work on this. And I wanted to talk about Zoom. So we're going to ask you to stay on mute throughout the presentation. If you have questions as people are speaking, put them in the chat. And the panelists are going to be checking the chat throughout the presentation and they'll answer your questions. So any questions, throw them in the chat and then we'll be checking those and answering them so that all people can get that the information that you're asking. Everyone loves reactions. So if you're loving the panelists as much as I do, put a little heart or a hand clap in there, let them know that you hear them and you support them. And you should be seeing all the panelists pinned. You know what I also need to do? I'm going to turn on closed caption for anyone who needs that. So I just turned it on. So if you go to the bottom of your Zoom page where it says CC or live transcription, you can click to have that on so you can see the transcription as it goes as we speak. I do want to say this is not a continuing education course. We do offer continuing education courses multiple times throughout the month. I will ask Olivia if she'll put the link into our CE schedule. In fact, in 2 weeks, I'll be doing a free CE for everyone. So no one has to pay for this CE. If you need CEs, it's 3 free CEs for you. So everyone's invited to come to that. And Olivia will put that information in the chat as we keep going as well. And I just put a note to myself to record this, which I've already done. So we are ready to start with our panel. And the first question I'm going to ask the panelists to answer is, first of all, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves to you so you know who they are and where they're joining us from. And then they're going to talk about their current social work role, like what type of social work they practice and where they work. So we are going to start with Sylas.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Sylas Kelly. I am a LMSW and I hail from Copeg, New York on Long Island. Right now, I'm currently working as a HUD-VASH social worker. And for those of you who might not be familiar, HUD-VASH, the acronym is Housing and Urban Development Veterans Administration Supportive Housing. And what we do is we work with the homeless veteran population. And we have basically 2 roles. We identify veterans who are classified as homeless. And once we do identify them, we then work to get them a voucher, housing choice voucher, so that they can get housed. And the majority of whatever their rent is covered by the voucher. They're then required to pay 1/3 of whatever their monthly income, whether it's a veterans benefit, SSI, SSD, they pay 1/3 of whatever they get. And our role and our goal is basically to, once they get housed, is to give them the opportunity to work on goals. And our main function is to make sure that they do not do anything to jeopardize their housing. We run into a lot of issues, a lot of substance abuse issues. There's some veterans with, children. There's some domestic violence sometimes. But for the most part, we work with the veterans to try to get them to realize what it is that they really would like to work on, what they would like to do. Sometimes it's a veteran who has a family, but he or she is estranged from their family, and we might work with them to develop better parenting skills so that they can reunite with their family. But mostly we run into veterans who are housed and have problems managing their finances, paying their rent on time. A lot of times we run into veterans who have food insecurity issues. Many times we're dealing with veterans who have mental health issues in addition to substance abuse. And so, we provide a wide variety of case management services to the veterans and their families if they happen to be veterans with children and a spouse. The other thing that I do as a social worker is I'm very involved in the media. And, prior to going to school for my MSW, I had gotten my bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism. So I've been in the media for quite a while before I decided to go back to school and get my my master's degree. And while I was attending Adelphi, I was producing radio public affairs programming for major radio stations, Z100 to be in particular. And one of my professors, Dr. Bradley Zodakoff, he happened to, he and I were talking one day after class, and he happened to muse, and he said, social work in the media. He said, that's a combination that I don't think has been used as much as it should. He said, Sylas, I think you found your niche. Now, when I studied broadcast journalism, my goal was to be in public affairs broadcasting, doing features, documentaries, and issues of importance and of value to the community. So highlighting community issues, mostly, resources that could help people, and also highlighting people who overcame challenges and kind of got their life back on the straight and narrow, and then went on to try to help and support and help others. And so once I decided I wanted to go into social work, it just made sense to me to use my broadcasting skills to highlight those that are doing things positive in the community, but also to tell our story as social workers and who we are and what we do and why it's so vitally important in all the different areas we work in. And that's kind of been my real goal and my push in the last 2.5, 3 years, is to really provide a platform. So I started a not-for-profit media company. And, and my goal is to provide platforms to community service agencies, human service agencies, social work agencies, those that have the budget, obviously working with them in an affordable manner. Those who may not have the budget, working with them to, like kind of on a sliding scale. But most importantly, many human service agencies and organizations are out there doing a lot of great things in the community and helping people. And so my role as a social worker and a journalist came together, and then I recreated and rebranded myself to be the only self-proclaimed and prescribed e-journalism social work advocate. And the name of my podcast is the Kelson on the Air Social Work Podcast, and I promote the social work profession. So those are my two areas of expertise per se.
Thank you, Sylas. And can you put in the chat where people can find your podcast?
Sure.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to Melody Lopez, and she's going to introduce herself and let you know her area of social work.
No, Melody on Matiwa. No, hopiet lit nakai dene. Tucson epkita. So good evening. Actually, it's afternoon for me. I'm Melody Lopez. I'm Hopi, Navajo, and Pueblo. I'm zooming in today from the Tana Atam Druid and the tribal lands of the Pascoyaki. And it's very important that I let you know that, not simply because it's the space I'm occupying, but because at all times as a social worker, I operate with respect, reciprocity, and relationship and responsibility, both to the land and to the people, the original people from these lands. So I work quite a bit with those two tribes. So I'm the president of Indigenous Strategies. It's a business, it's not a nonprofit. And I do consulting where I blend traditional Native knowledge with contemporary Indigenous scholarship in many different aspects. I work at statewide policy levels, but I also work locally with evaluation for tribes, tribal programs. And then I do direct services with individuals, families, and communities. So it's a wonderful life over here. Funny enough, most people don't know me through Indigenous Strategies. They know me through the other work I do in the community, which in some ways I say is just another aspect of social work, which is I am a founding matriarch of the Honor Collective. Honor stands for Healing Our Nations, Offering Resiliency. We specifically work, we're a collective of 10 Indigenous women, true spirit, and non-binary individuals who are grounded in the feminine. And we provide a lot of services to individuals, families, and tribes that have been impacted by the murdered, missing Indigenous relations. And that's a lot of what I do. It's unpaid work, but that's the good stuff. That's where social work comes into play. And you heard me use the 4 R's earlier in how I work with the people in the land. And Honor Collective works with the 4 R's. Again, respect, reciprocity, responsibility, and relationship. That comes from Sean Wilson's Research as Ceremony. Wonderful book. Another thing that I do is I'm the co-founder of the Native Education Alliance in Tucson, which does a lot of programming, direct programming with our Native youth. We have 22 tribes in Arizona, and about 1/3 of the land in Arizona is tribally owned. So there's a lot of us over here. And then lastly, I've co-founded the Indigenous Intellectual Warriors, which is actually a group of Native men, two-spirit, and non-binary individuals who are grounded in the masculine. And the reason I'm there as their auntie is that I am there to help listen to them and help them execute what they want. And that's a very different role, to be quiet and to listen and to understand what it is they truly want without taking up any space. And that's a beautiful thing. As far as my credentials, I got my master's in social welfare from UC Berkeley, long after it was cool. And actually, at the exact same time that affirmative action was destroyed. So it was an interesting time to be at UC Berkeley and to get your master's in social welfare at a time where social welfare actually was not being implemented at that level. I guess it's the backlash we're feeling now. So that's a little bit of who I am and what I do.
Thank you, Melody. You're going to make my son Seth so happy that you do a lot of work with the missing Indigenous women. That's one of the things he's most passionate about. And Alyssa, you are next. Can you introduce yourself and let everyone know your type of social work? And I see you have a friend who's going to help you with that.
I do. Hi, everyone. I'm Alyssa Pepe. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I currently reside in Buffalo, New York. I graduated from the University at Buffalo, right here in Buffalo, and went to Canisius, studying psychology and sociology before that. I have my dog Lola here. Thought she was a good companion talking about veterinary social work tonight. So my areas of social work, I am a veterinary social worker at Orchard Park Veterinary Medical Center, maybe about 20 minutes outside of Buffalo for those of you that aren't near here. And then I also work as a clinician in private practice, seeing both adults, adolescents, teenagers, those are my interests in private practice. So a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with veterinary social work. So I just want to provide a little bit of background. It's been around since the 80s, but the term was actually coined probably in the late 80s, early 90s by Dr. Elizabeth Strand at University of Tennessee in Knoxville. There is, if anybody's interested, a postmaster's certificate at UTK, and it's all virtual. It's a really great program, really focuses on the 4 different areas of vet social work. So if you're not familiar, the 4 areas of veterinary social work are going to be animal-related grief and bereavement. So this, I think, is the biggest aspect of my job, really focusing on helping people make quality of life decisions around their pets, helping and supporting through the euthanasia process, the grief and loss after it, because pets, I think, are a really important part of people's lives, and the human-animal bond is there no matter what type of animal it is. The second area of veterinary social work is going to be the compassion, fatigue, and conflict management. So this area is more based in with the staff. I provide a lot of support through debriefings, meeting with them one-on-one. I do want to differentiate that it's not clinical in the sense, it's more of just a support, allowing them to process, and then providing resources. So sending them to private practice, clinics, encouraging, follow up with their primary care doctor, all of those good things that we love to do as social workers. And then helping too with the stress. Moral distress is huge in vet medicine. So we might not agree with what the owner says, or we may think differently than what the owner says in that way too. So it's helping the staff see the full picture. So it's really bringing in the social work perspective, and having connections with the veterinarians, the vet techs, or the nurses, and the assistants to just bring in that different perspective. And then the third area is the link between human and animal violence. So that just gets into regards of domestic violence. So if there's something more going on at home, sometimes we see that in animals. If they're being hurt or abused, New York State actually just in January made it mandatory that vets have to, are now mandated reporters for animal abuse, which is a huge step, I think, in being able to protect vulnerable populations. And then the fourth area is animal assisted interventions. This I do not focus on, so unfortunately I can't really speak too much on it, as I don't have a lot of hands-on experience. But this is going to be using animals, mostly dogs, sometimes horses as well, in an actual treatment plan level of clinical work. So bringing the pets into individual therapy or going to the pet to receive that treatment. So that's just a little overview of vet social work. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Alyssa. I know everyone was really interested to learn about that. So I know they'll enjoy your answers. And next is Cecily Mitchell Harper.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Samantha, and thank you everyone for being here. So great to see all of you and learn from the other panelists. So my name is Cecily Mitchell Harper, and I am from Westchester County, New York. That's currently where I reside. I'm a licensed social worker. I have been practicing social work now for more than a decade. Graduated with my MSW from the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice in 2011. So it has been 11 years as a practicing social worker. I currently am a facilitator, a coach, and strategic advisor. And I also serve as a facilitator for the New York State Revolutionized Social Work. So before I go into a little bit more in depth in what I do as a social worker currently, I would like to share a little bit about who I am, my values, and why I do the work that I do. So I ground all of my work and how I show up in the world within anti-racist values and practices. I've been really for the past, let's say 2 years, I've been on an intentional personal journey within the past 2 years to live and work in a way that is healing, restorative, and creates sustainable communities of liberation and care. So my guiding mantra for all of what I do, I love quotes, so I'm always referencing quotes, and I'm gonna reference a quote right now. My guiding mantra for all of what I do is a quote from a social activist, Grace Lee Boggs, who says, "Transform yourself to transform the world." So that is literally what I remind myself of every single day. And I wanna say, particularly during the past few years, navigating the collective trauma of the pandemic, and all the societal shifts and the realities of the world in which we live right now, my work really, I've been really just struck by this question and trying to answer this question through my work is, how can we reimagine and embrace a way of living, being, and working in a way that is transformative, healing, and affirms our collective and shared humanity? And so I share this because I really see this as a foundation of my current social work practice. So now let me talk a little bit more about what I actually do. So the population I work with currently as a social worker and really historically has been Black and Brown marginalized children, youth, and families. I've worked in New York City. I've worked in Philadelphia. I spent many years in Philadelphia. As I mentioned, graduated from University of Pennsylvania. So I started out practicing social work in Philadelphia, actually working at a school in North Philadelphia as a school social worker. So I've spent several years in clinical practice with children, youth, and families, including children and youth with behavioral emotional challenges and learning differences, and children and families in the child welfare system. I served as an outpatient mental health clinician for children and families in the child welfare system. And I also I've been involved and have a lot of years of experience in applied research and program evaluation in various areas, including mental health services for children and youth, and early intervention for vulnerable children and families. So while I don't like to classify myself as strictly micro or macro, as I really struggle with that dichotomization, if I had to classify myself, I currently practice at the meso level. So it's really the medium between clinical practice and macro practice. So in my work right now, I strengthen organizations and other youth serving institutions such as schools, K-12 schools, to be able to be trauma informed. So I see myself as really straddling the line and weaving in and out of the worlds of more macro social work. So you're talking about research, program evaluation, policy, and then micro practice on the ground. I work with clients. So really my work is trying to sort of blend and bridge that gap between the two worlds, sometimes which can seem kind of separate. And so my work really throughout my time practicing as a social worker has just been weaving in and out. I do research, I do clinical practice, I'm training, direct line staff, social workers, et cetera. And so currently my work is focused on capacity building efforts for youth serving social service nonprofit organizations and schools. So that can include and looks like professional development workshop facilitation, coaching for out of school time staff and teachers, technical assistance, and program evaluation services. My areas of interest are around trauma, secondary, vicarious, organizational and community trauma, and building the capacity of human service organizations to be trauma informed and support the well-being of clients and staff, all utilizing an anti-racist and anti-oppressive lens. So currently I work as an independent consultant, and then as well, I serve on staff as senior advisor for strategy, learning, and practice at Student Success Network, which is an intermediary nonprofit organization where we basically bring together a group of nonprofit organizations throughout New York City. And we're really focused on advocacy and collective impact work around several initiatives, including youth mental health, supporting youth who are in unstable housing, and youth in the child welfare system. So in my role at Student Success Network, I serve as the co-leader for a youth participatory action research project. And so that's my work at Student Success Network. Just a few other words about me, and then I know my time is almost up. I am a certified field instructor. So I serve as a field instructor for second year macro MSW students, specifically from NYU Silver School of Social Work. And I also serve as a mentor for current students at my alma mater, UPenn. And I also support NASW NYS in many different ways, currently facilitating a 5-session professional development series called Towards a Transformative Trauma-Informed Social Work Practice. Actually, the first session was last week. The second session is actually tomorrow afternoon. So I'm heavy in that work. And again, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And thank you so much for all of you for being here. And yeah, looking forward to our questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecily. And I did put a link in the chat. Cecily and Melody are both leaders in the revolution. And that is a free and open anti-racist work that we do about every 6 weeks. So sign up for that. And yes, if you can come to Cecily's training, I highly recommend it. And next on my list is one of our board members, Naja Zaid.
Thank you for having me. Wow, I feel like the work I do is nothing compared to everyone else that we just heard on the panel, but at the same time, everything we do is something, right? we're all contributing, and that's what's interesting about social work. For me, it really, like what you heard from others, it was something that has happened in our lives. Probably, we were born with social work in our bottle, right? That was the milk that, you know, we were given, and we evolved into getting into the profession. But social work was something I was actually doing as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, but I just didn't have that degree. My bachelor's degree is in paralegal education and in real estate. So that was a big jump, right? And then I wanted to look for something. I was helping individuals, but I never felt fulfilled in my field. So I wanted to actually go into a major in which I was able to really take what I was doing in life and get some backing, those credentials, which is my master's of social work. So I ended up getting my social work, master's of social work from Syracuse University, along with an executive master's of public administration and a few graduate certificates that really were integrated into my social work practice, which is international leadership in non-governmental organizations and gerontology. So they all are interconnected and interrelated because I tend to work more with the refugee and immigrant populations. I work with all populations in general, but I have a greater focus on some specific populations because I'm like a magnet where they kind of come to me. And a lot of it is because that relatism that a person might have. They can relate to me for one reason or another, or I can relate to them vice versa. So being culturally responsive, offering that in my work, I think has been appreciated. And then I went into further my academics to get a doctorate in public health, which complements my social work. So now I'm doing two things. First of all, with my social work, I started off on the COPA track, that policy, the macro levels. And from there, that was about maybe 12 years ago almost. And, you know, I was doing some advocacy, still helping individuals, but at maybe faith-based organizations, nonprofit organizations. And then I decided I want to get into the clinical side of this and really get my move towards working on my clinical license. So now I'm actually with a practice called Psychotherapy and Counseling Services in Astoria, New York, and I'm doing some telehealth. At the same time, I'm a professor at SUNY Oswego, which is what you see in my background, and the Department of Health Promotion and Wellness. So really, these are all interconnected in part because a lot of the research that I do, a lot of the work that I do in the community has to do with trauma, has to do with addictions and substance use disorders. And when I say addictions, it includes technology and social media addictions. So those are just some of the things that I focus on. But the trauma is really deep because we look at the different levels of trauma. And also I compare the trauma experiences between someone from, let's say, a veteran to a refugee, to someone who is maybe in an underserved community or underrepresented community, and looking at the similarities and the differences and integrating those into practice and modifying as well. I'm also a certified mental health first aid instructor. And that has been very useful with my social work practice. Now, when I go into practice social work as a therapist, I'm doing teletherapy. I'm supervised, which is wonderful because I have someone that I can go and talk to about the different methods or strategies that I might apply with the client. But I'm also able to take that back into the classroom and educate populations or think about policies I might try to address or research. So really what I do is I take, similar to Cicely, taking and Melody and everyone else who spoke, taking the best of both worlds, of all worlds, and putting it together. And what we'll notice is that in social work, we're kind of getting our feet wet in so many different things. And always in academia, they're telling me, focus, focus, focus. And I'm like, I am focused, but it's so hard to really stay focused on one particular thing because there's so many things happening in society and it's rapidly changing. And we are social workers. We are meant to be like octopuses and having ourselves everywhere, but staying focused at the same time. And that's what I do.
Is that all, Naja?
No.
No.
I'm the Central Division Director of NASW, but I'm also a Vice Chair of the North American Society of Refugee Healthcare Society. So you can see, like, I'm sitting on these different boards in part one of the main reasons why I sit on these different committees is because we need individuals. We need that representation. We need individuals to understand that social work is a profession and we are a resource at the same time. We are highly needed, but underestimated. Also, the other reason why I sit on some of these boards is because of that underrepresentation. So someone as myself, I'm underrepresented in, I identify as being a Muslim Arab American female, underrepresented in many areas. And we have very few individuals who are getting into these organizations, but I highly, highly recommend that if you can, get involved with NASW, get involved with organizations where you can show the representation of social workers.
And another thing Naja has done with us, she worked with several of our other Muslim social workers in New York State, and they did a chapter chat. And you can find the recording of that chapter chat in the chat. I just put the link of where you'll find this recording. That recording is in there as well. And I suggest you watch it. It was really powerful. And now we have June. June is the last member of our panel to answer this question. Let everyone know who you are.
All right, I'll be a little bit shorter, most likely, just because I don't have near as much to say as everybody else. I'm just going last is always like, okay, so my name is June Paul. My pronouns are they or she. I prefer they. I'm an assistant professor of social work at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York, but I live in Albany, New York. So I teach, primarily what I do now is I teach social work courses. So I teach social policy. Sam actually and the entire NASW New York State was involved in my social policy class last semester. I teach a course called Power, Privilege, and Oppression, working with LGBTQ populations and some other courses. And I also conduct research that examines public and community-based programs and policies for children, youth, and families with an explicit focus on intersectionality and disproportionality among dimensions of race, class, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And so what I do is I use an approach called community participatory-based research. And I do this to investigate the origins and structures and consequences of discrimination and social injustice and child welfare, juvenile justice, and other social service settings. And my particular focus is working on advancing strategies for providing more equitable and effective care and services for LGBTQ+ youth. So I also do trainings for working with LGBTQ youth. I've also done one of those for the NASW, but I've done them for colleges and universities with a colleague of mine at SUNY Albany, as well as program evaluations for agencies that serve this particular population. And currently I'm actually working with someone named Gary Mallon, who's really a pioneer in the field. And we are updating best practices for working with LGBTQ youth with the Child Welfare League of America. So I'm excited to be doing that work as well. So prior to obtaining my PhD, I did work in the field for a really long time. I'm 54 years old, or I will be 54 years old. I don't feel like it. I guess that's a good thing. So I've worked in human services for almost 17 years before I went back to school. And so I did a lot of direct service work. So I worked with runaway and homeless youth. I worked as a school social worker, did a lot of other things. I also did a lot of policy work. I was a statewide administrator in both public child welfare and education in Wisconsin. I saw we had some folks from Wisconsin, or at least one person from Wisconsin, so yay. So yeah, that's what I did beforehand. And I'm just super excited to be here. I love listening to all the amazing things that all the folks on the panel are doing. And I'm sure all of you that are in the audience as well are doing some amazing things. So thank you.
Thank you all. I think that you have all represented the field of social work so well with this first question. I mean, just between the six of you, you cover like a million areas of social work. And I've been following up on things you say and putting links in the chat of different ways we've covered this or interest groups we have. So thank you all for such wonderful answers to the first question. Now, the next question is, what are the benefits and challenges of being a social worker? And Sylas, we are back to you.
Okay. The benefits of being a social worker are many. It's too numerous to mention. But just to mention a few, we change futures, we make an indelible impact on society. We help lift up families, communities, organizations, populations. We hold people accountable. We speak truth to power. We have the ability to adapt to any type of population, any type of area in society. If you name one area in society, there's not one area that you could think of from A to Z on this planet that a social worker cannot, does not, and has not played a role in. So the benefits is that with the social work degree, you can do anything and go anywhere. And you just got to find your it and your why, and then you'll know that you're on the right path. Challenges are, as I heard one of my colleagues say previously, we are underestimated. We are not compensated at the level that we should be, and that has to change. There used to be a moniker that said, social workers, we're in it for the outcome, not the income. Well, newsflash, that moniker has now changed. Social workers, we're in it for the outcome and the income. And the challenge is that we have to get society, governing bodies, public sector organizations to realize that what we do is so valuable. And people just don't really see that. When people hear the term social work, they automatically, subconsciously think the worst of society. They think somebody who needs food stamps, somebody who kids need to be taken away from them. But we're so much more. We do so much more. Changing futures of people, changing the whole trajectory. The challenge is that we got to get more people, especially those in seats of power, to realize that social workers have that unique ability to really lift up one individual. By lifting up that one individual, that individual then can lift up his or her family, and that family can then lift up his or her community, and that community then can lift up their state or their locale. So the challenge is, it's so hard to really get people to see that social workers work with people in all aspects of life, not just those that are struggling and going through challenging times. And a perfect example of that is we have social workers that are elected officials. We have social workers in the highest seats of government. We have social workers that work on an international level. We have social workers that work in every area that you could think of. But when you hear the word social work, when most people hear the word social work, they have tunnel vision. They don't let their minds expand or even wonder, well, what can social workers do? The other challenge is that we have to get more professional social workers who have risen up to be CEOs and executive directors to continually say that they're a social worker who has reached that plateau. And the reason why that's important, because when most of society hears the term social work, they don't equate that with somebody that's a CEO that makes six figures. I remember doing a speaking engagement at Stony Brook University. Matter of fact, the last in-person speaking engagement I did was March 3rd, 2020. That was the very beginning of the COVID pandemic. And I remember speaking on the stage, and we were talking about social work professional organizations. And I did a poll, and I said, okay, you guys got to really know what you're worth. How many people here know that as a social worker, you can earn six figures? And very few hands went up. So one of the challenges is that we have to get professional social workers who are running organizations and who are doing things that call for a high salary to talk about the fact that they are a social worker, that they're educated and schooled as a social worker, that they have a social worker degree. And one of my mentors, Dr. Jacqueline Mondros, who just recently retired from Stony Brook University, she said at one of our NASW speaking engagements that she graced us with her presence as a featured speaker. She said, whatever you do, whatever your role is, if you have a social work degree, when you introduce yourself, when you write down your credentials, when you speak to people to ask you what you do, you say, I'm a forensic research social worker. I'm a geriatric social worker. I'm a mental health social worker. I'm a child welfare social worker. I'm a e-journalism social worker. So that people start to make the connection between a social worker and, oh, gee, how many times you tell somebody that you're a social worker and you work in a population, and then they look at you and they go, gee, I didn't know social workers did that. So that's one of our biggest challenges, is that we got to continue to promote our profession in all the myriad of ways that we serve society, and also to let people know that you cannot put a price on what social workers do for individuals and families and communities. You can't put a price on it. And so that being the case, we need to make sure that we keep sending the message loudly that we need to be compensated more equitably based on the impact that we have on society and individuals' lives. That is the biggest challenge that I've seen, is that we don't really get the respect and the recognition for all the myriad of ways that we have a profound impact on society. And I'm gonna leave it on that note.
Thank you, Sylas. I want to address a question that came in asking, how do we advocate for more money? So one of the ways, this question actually came in from one of the people joining us from outside of New York State. So I can tell you in New York that we at the chapter work very closely with legislators, and we get as many of you in front of legislators as possible. So we actually had a Capital Action Day on February 15th, and we had the legislators were coming in the room and starting the conversation with, we think you should be making more money and we don't think you should have student debt. That was not why we even asked them there. But the reason they did that is because they've worked with us now really consistently over the last 2 years, and we've shown them all the areas where we are. So they come to us to ask about legislation. They come to us to ask us for expert testimony. So if you're in another state, contact your NASW and let them know what area you work in and say, I'm available to speak to legislative committees. If they need to know information about this area of social work, I'm your person. Have them contact me and I'll testify, because that's one of the strongest things you can do is build the reputation. And Sylas, you touched on that, so thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to just say one other thing. Wherever you are, whatever state you're in, also very important, and Sam can attest to this, and some of our NASW New York State people, chapter members can attest to this, find out who your political social workers are in whatever state and connect with them. Because they are the voice that sits at the table, and by making that connection, you can bring back those issues, and they will address those issues when they have a chance to speak to committees and have the floor. So whatever state you're in, make sure you know who your elected officials are, who are professionally educated, trained, and licensed social workers.
Yes, and also let all your legislators know who you are. So good job, Sylas. Okay, I am going to hand it over to Melody Lopez to talk about the benefits and challenges of social work.
Thank you, Sam. So I'm going to kind of take this question backwards and work from there. So for me, the biggest challenge personally is that social work as a profession centers whiteness as a norm, and that centering is very destructive to the BIPOC community. For anyone who isn't familiar, BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color. And I mean that in the most historical, documented way possible. And I think that being an Indigenous social worker, it's not simply that the minute I say MSW that I'm a baby snatcher. That's just one part. The part is that me, MSW social worker, that I am perceived, that I buy into that whiteness is to be centered in my community. And so that's a challenge for me working through. And that's part of why I joined the Revolutionize team. It's for my healing, selfish right here. And so what's the benefit? The benefit of social work is creating what I like to call Indigenous social work sovereignty, is that we have the right to construct how we can create, view, and honor the social work profession. I really heard Naja speaking about, I love that idea of the bottle of drinking social work, because that's exactly how I feel. I was a social worker long before the degree. I didn't realize it. I joked at an interview I had, Los Angeles County of Mental Health, and I was applying to be a mental health clinician, and we had an informal lunch where they asked how long had I been practicing social work. And at that time I said, oh, about 25 years, including my family. And, you know, it was funny, not funny. And so I feel like the degree empowered me to be who I am authentically and to operate like that. And so if there's any students in here, I just want to reach out and let you know, I know that education is tough and they're saying some things that may not resonate with you so much. And it's okay. It's okay, because when you graduate and you have those initials, you can create the authentic relationship and the authentic praxis that you need to reach out into your community to serve them to the best of your ability. So I love decolonizing social work. That is both the challenge and the benefit. It is fantastic. I love to take that critical lens and examine all the different ideas, all the different concepts. That's when Cecily mentioned having, and I was like, yes, I'm a field instructor and I spend time with my students and we talk about this and I ask what they can do and their ideas, because I don't have all the answers, but my community does, all the way from youth, all the way through elders. Intergenerationally, we have the strength of the answers to bring that Indigenous social work sovereignty and to create something new and vibrant and honoring and respectful of our peoples and our needs. And I fuss back a little bit. I'm pushing back against trauma-informed care, which I do believe it exists, but I rather talk about wellness-informed treatment, because I don't like referring to that my community is in trauma. Well, take a look around. Globally, we are all in trauma. So we don't need to write grants or things and talk about how sad it is, how difficult it is, even though it might be. We need to talk about those strengths. We need to talk about our resiliency. We need to talk about how these things have people rise, whether it be individuals, families, communities. They can rise, they can thrive. And not that, again, that I have all the answers, but that we have the answers. We collectively can create something exciting. And frankly, I don't know another field outside social work that really allows that. And so that's why I love social work, and I've reclaimed it, and I will scream it from the rafters. And so that's, I think, my answer. Thank you.
Melody, you have me busting out my chair over here as a Native social worker. And yes, I just had this conversation with a group of students today. I said, if you want to learn about Native people, you ask, but not to come in and try to tell us what to do. We already have the answers to what to do. But Melody, yes. Yes, yes, yes. And this is what the revolution is all about. So everyone join us in the revolution, because we're all about, we have the power to change this profession, and we're going to. So yeah, you got me going, Melody. Okay, Alyssa, on to you. What are the benefits and the challenges of social work?
So I had a list of them written down here, and I think Sylas and Melody already spoke on so many of them and said them so beautifully. So rather, I'm just going to go with some different ones if that's okay. But I really just want to go back from the micro level of just being able to empower clients and how rewarding that is, I think, on the individual level. I think as social workers, sometimes it can feel really difficult, right? We're not sure if we're helping clients, we're not sure where our place is. But then as years go by, right, you start to realize how much you are helping people on the individual, meso, and macro level. So I think that is really beautiful. And then I also want to just point out the interdisciplinary teams that we work with too. It's such a unique position to work with so many different people. And we have that ability and privilege to share the social work perspective, where most times social workers wouldn't be in that position or in that seat, or they wouldn't have that perspective without us being there. I think the veterinary community really embraces social workers in the few hospitals that they're in. So I can use that as a personal testament and example. For example, my hospital did not have a social worker. A lot of staff did not know how to work with social workers. And then now I feel like they constantly get me for everything, or for their own concerns or questions. So it's just really cool and amazing to just see people gravitate towards that once you get through the stigma piece of it. And then I think environment too you work in makes a huge difference. And that can also be a challenge, right? Of what your clinic looks like, what the organization looks like, what the private practice looks like. So I just also wanted to hit on that being both a challenge and an benefit of the environment. So thank you.
I love how you got the interdisciplinary work in there, because that's so important, right? It can be a challenge, but it's also a benefit, because we bring a lot to those teams. Thank you so much, Alyssa. Okay, Cecily, you are up.
Okay. Wow. I'm so fired up. Just having this discussion, this is like, oh man, it's food for my soul, really. Yeah. I'm not going to say too much, because I feel like so much of what has already been shared in terms of the challenges and the benefits is what I was going to say. But if I could, I'll just say a few words, and I actually would like to share a personal story, if that's okay, because I think it best highlights the benefits of social work. So I'm going to start with that, and then I can go into a little bit of the challenges that I see that I would like to uplift here. So, we talked about a lot of folks since we started have been talking about, social workers at its best, right? Social work at its best sees the entire picture. So at its best, we practice at the heart of ecological theory, right? We learned that like the first day of class, person and environment. So I've seen that social work skills can be applied across settings and institutions and situations. And to me, there's like this beautiful variety in the profession, yet we share all common values guided by common principles and ethics. So I wanted to share a personal journey of how I came into social work, because I think it's really a beautiful example of this. So I graduated from Wesley University with a bachelor's degree in psychology. And my first job after college was in a school-based behavioral health program. So I moved to Philadelphia after graduating from Wesleyan. It was in Connecticut. So I moved to Philadelphia for this job. And it was then that I realized that I was actually practicing social work. I just didn't have the language for it. And I felt like I was the only one actually doing it. So I was, really tasked with working directly with young, this was an elementary school. So basically, and it was in North Philadelphia, primarily Black and brown students, really tasked with working with the students who struggled the most in the classroom, who had, labeled like diagnoses, et cetera. And for me, from the minute I got there, I was always focused not just on the child, but also, and not just on the family, but I was focused on the neighborhood. I was focused on the school. I was wondering, so what is happening in this school? How is the policies and practices in this school actually interacting and mediating the behavior of the child? And I often was told, no, just stick to the child, just focus on the client. And I pushed back all the time, because I was like, I'm sorry, I cannot just focus on the client. Like, I have to focus on all the other pictures. I didn't realize it, but I was actually practicing social work. I had that social work lens. And so I spent 2 years there. And after graduating, I moved on to research and, was actually involved in education policy research. That's how I learned research skills and program evaluation. but I couldn't. And actually at one point I was actually pursuing a PhD in education, but something felt wrong about that. And I could not, throughout my time doing research, I could not forget about the school that I was at and what was happening in that school, the students, the families. I had it in my mind, and I was like, I have to do something. I can't just let that go, you know? And it was actually a conversation that I had with my father, who actually serves as a really strong mentor for me. It's funny because he's not actually a social worker, but his background is steeped in social services. He's since retired, but he served as a mentor. He continues to serve as a mentor for me. And when I was sharing with him my struggles and kind of like, yeah, I thought I was going to pursue a degree in education. Now I'm like, I don't know. Keep on thinking about the school. I want to do something. I really want to do something with policy in terms of schools, but also that looks at mental health in schools, etc. And it was my dad who said, have you ever considered social work? And at the time, I have to be honest, I had a very stereotypical view of social work. So I said, oh no, I don't want to be the person that takes children away from their parents. That's not me. I'm not doing that. And my dad pushed back and said, actually, social work is much more than that. And he really showed me that social work, is very broad and can be applied across settings. And so that's really what I wanted to do. And basically he showed me that what I wanted to do, I could do it with a social work degree. And he was absolutely right. And so I credit him all the time for me coming into social work and for exposing me and expanding my view, even before I got into, UPenn, exposing me and expanding my view for what social work is, moving away from that limited understanding, which unfortunately we have in this society, right? That social work does, takes children away and so for me, I share that story because for me, it's with what other degree I feel like could I so seamless do clinical practice. And then also, I was an outpatient therapist, as I shared. And then also I've worked in research. I was doing research center. Now I'm doing a participatory action research project with youth. So it's like all these skills that I'm able to just apply in different settings. I just weave, as I said, I weave in and out. I do this, I do that, I do that. And sometimes it's hard to kind of figure out because people want to like nail me down and like, so what do you do, Sess? I'm like, I do everything. But it all has a common like thread, right? And so that to me is the beauty of social work. And so that's what I wanted to say in terms of the beauty of it. The challenges, I'm not, Melody, I think we have already talked about the challenges. I mean, that's what is so coming out to me right now, particularly in my practice. As I said, I'm deeply committed to anti-racist work and anti-racist practice. I refuse to practice in any other way. And what I have found is that social work is situated, right? We are situated within white supremacy, as Melody said. We're situated at the nexus of capitalism and white supremacy, which we know go hand in hand. And so for me, it's just really challenging. And this is why I'm so grateful to be part of NASW Revolutionize, because I feel like I found a place to actually practice social work that is disruptive. We can disrupt, right? We can practice, as Melody said, we can practice social work in a different way. It's just reimagining, re-envisioning, right? That is my job. That is our job, I feel, but we can do it, and I feel like we are called to do it, particularly during this time that we're in. Another challenge that I want to uplift, particularly as we think about racism and trauma and, just everything that's happening, is social workers taking care of ourselves, right? So secondary trauma, as I said, a lot of my work is in secondary trauma and vicarious trauma. And for me, I've had direct experience, right? In secondary trauma, vicarious trauma. I wish I would have learned that in school because I really didn't. I thought it was just me. No, and now I see that it's part of a systemic issue, right? And so how can we as social workers take care of ourselves? And I also want to push back against this thing of self-care, because we talk about, oh, go take care of yourself. I'm moving away from self-care. Really, it's about community care. How do we come together in community? How do we have sustainable, thriving communities that allow all of us to take care of ourselves and each other? So it's not about self-care. Self-care is a small piece of that, but it's actually about community care, because that's where the real change happens. When we talk about transformation, we can't do it alone. We have to do it in community. So how can we do community care and work so that our work is sustainable and transformative? So that's where I am. That's a challenge, but I also feel like for me, it's this great, opportunity for me. And also, I also push back on trauma-informed care. My whole series right now is like disrupting that and complicating that. And really it's about healing-centered practices that actually go back to indigenous, roots. And so it's nothing new. This is going back to indigenous roots and really getting ourselves back to the foundations of who we are, because we have so lost that in our, state of white supremacy. It's moving away from that. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
You all are getting me all excited over here with your talking. So thank you, Cecily. And Naja.
I have to say, Cecily, I had self-care written. Oh, it's not going to show because of my virtual background, but I had a piece of paper up, but self-care was on there. But I like the word community care much better. Without repeating what was said, I will say some of the benefits. So when I got in, before I contemplated getting into social work, I really talked to my friends. I said, what do you think? Because I thought about psychology too. And I seen that someone had put something in the chat box about how psychologists, they frown upon social work. And the reality is not just psychologists, but the mental health counselors, marriage and family therapists. And the reason why, and why I chose social work is because it's so broad. Look, I said I went from COPA to, now I'm working towards my clinical. And like we have already said, the whole panel said, we're everywhere. Sylas, thinking about the media and social work, which is very, very needed, especially now, like Dr. Oz can do it. Why can't we? Right. But thinking about these intersections and, as Alyssa had mentioned, the interdisciplinary work, well, we also have intradisciplinary work. So like I'm multidisciplinary and I work with physical therapists. I work with other individuals in other sectors. One of the challenges that I do see now is that we have a lot of individuals that are getting certified in psychology, happiness, or whatever it's called, happy psychology, or something else. There's the health coaching, which they incorporate the mental health piece. I'm a worksite wellness specialist, and I'm certified as a worksite wellness coach, but I integrate that with my social work, right? But there are individuals who have no social work background that are starting to come in, and they think that with the certificate, they're identifying as counselors. So we as professionals, we need to also begin to hold individuals accountable. And that's why we have organizations like our NASW New York chapter to do the reports, to file the claims if needed to be, to put individuals in their place, as we would say, just to make sure that our profession is acknowledged and there is no overlapping that would be of concern. So those are some of the challenges. The other one is, when I think about what Melody had mentioned about social workers coming into the community, Cicely, you as well, one of the things, it wasn't just taking children away, it was also those social workers are going to taint your children's minds, right? To make them go against their parents, especially if you come from an ethnic community where they're really trying to hold on to culture. And with due respect, some of it, the cultural part, if you get to know it, if you educate yourself on it, you're like, okay, I get it. This is, I would, we need to respect that. But also the disruption of family. Oftentimes there were divorces that would happen after someone had met with a social worker. So then families were like, oh, stay away from social workers. Well, now it's educating the community of what a social worker does beyond just going, the caseworkers that go and help file their DSS forms and all of that, but also that, we as social workers have to take time to educate ourselves, not only on culture, but the history of our populations that we're serving. So when I am looking at someone who is from Somalia or Cambodia or Palestine or South American regions, or even our indigenous communities, right? What is the history and how has that history influenced their lives? How has it influenced their mental health or whatever reason that they're coming to me for, whether it's for mental health purposes or advocacy? And like, as was mentioned, what can I do to help? How can I help complement their lives rather than taking charge of their lives, right? So educating ourselves is very, very important, but also educating the educators. And so I was in at an institution where honestly, they promoted social justice and everything, but they did completely opposite. of what they were educating the students to do. So here I am talking to educators and teaching them about the reason why we need to be culturally responsive, culturally aware, have cultural humility, learn our history, why there are some reasons why certain communities react a certain way. So as you get into your field, and you might go from one organization to another to really, until you really get your niche, right? When you really say, okay, this is what I really want to do. But interim of that, you may be doing some advocacy, even if you have no intentions of doing advocacy. You're going to be doing continuous learning because you're working with diverse populations. Depending on who you're working with at that moment, you're going to have some continuing education that is required and some that goes beyond your professional development or continuing education. When I think about what Sylas said in terms of CEOs with social work backgrounds, you know, I look at my real estate background. I haven't forgotten what I've done in my past, but I've used it and integrated it into my work. So now when I think in gerontology, when I think about elderly or aging friendly homes or smart homes for persons with different needs and abilities, I'm actually integrating my real estate background with my social work. So coupling that, so you're gonna find your niche and you may find that you have more than one interest. So those are the benefits of social work, is that we're so broad. We can actually go back and forth, and we're looking at it from that holistic approach, kind of like what Cicely was alluding to. You can't, it's so hard. We're either gonna put a bandage on a person, which is just focus on what, you know, the client at that time when they're coming to us, or we're going to help them holistically, which is getting to the root of the problem to help them heal. And that's what I have to say.
Naja, that was awesome. I want to piggyback on something you said, because I think it's important. The comment about psychologists looking down on social workers. We can't control other professions looking down on us, but what we can control is how we respond to that. And I've heard those negative comments too. And my first thought is always, why are you so insecure that you need to like try to, you know, demean our profession? And, you know, usually what my response is something along the lines of, oh, you know, I highly respect your profession. And, you know, our profession is a little different. We have some overlap with clinical work, but we also are called to make social change. We're called for social justice. We're advocating at the same time we're doing clinical work and all this. So that's typically how I respond to that, is like, I can control how I respond, and you looking down on me doesn't mean I look down on me, because I don't know why you're looking down on me or our profession, because I'm not. So like that, just keep that in mind. It doesn't matter what they do. How are you going to respond? And how do you look at our profession and at yourself as a practitioner? And then June, you are going to take us home with this question.
All right. Well, and I just have to say to what you just said, Sam, too, and that's the backlash part, right? I mean, so if you think about why people say those kinds of things, because we are trying to make differences and use our social justice lens, and there's a huge backlash against that. Okay, so everybody said everything so well and so beautifully. I'm just going to add like a couple little things. The one thing that I really love about social work is that I get to work on social justice stuff every single day. It is the top value that I have, and I get to find ways to do that in every job I've ever had. So I started in practice and I went to policy, and now I'm doing research. And even when I have been in mainstream institutions, because I wasn't trained to think about things differently, I've been able to find a way to resist and find a way to push back. And that has been a huge gift. I also feel really good about being able to teach students practices that are not mainstream and to really help them think about how to conduct social work and think about social work differently, right? So thinking about anti-oppressive practice and all of the, like thinking about ways to dismantle systems and disrupt systems, and even when we're within those systems, to be doing that work. And so I would say those are the biggest benefits for me. But I mean, I would say the challenge is that it's tough work sometimes. I mean, it's fulfilling, but it's tough. And it's really hard sometimes to witness change, because change can be kind of slow. But we have to stick with it. And it is so worth it. It is just, we just have to keep reminding ourselves why we're doing this work. And that even sometimes we may not be seeing changes. And I say this to my students all the time, think of your sphere of influence, even if it's with one person at that moment, keep doing it, right? Because that matters. Every person matters. And depending on where you are, you might have a different sphere of influence, but it is so worth it to keep going and to keep doing what we're doing.
And I've seen you do that, June. You are really good at doing that with your students and in the practice. You're so good with, you really uplift the voices of people who have been historically oppressed and give them space to use their voice. Okay, we have one question with 2 parts left. And I'm going to change up the order, so don't kill me, panelists. I'm going to go in the order that you're on my screen. So it's going to be Naja, Alyssa, Melody, Cecily, June, and Sylas, so that some of the people at the end get the opportunity to say the answers first. So Naja, for you, 2 parts. What have you learned in the field that you didn't learn in school? And part 2, what advice do you have for students preparing to enter the field?
Okay. I feel like I'm on Jeopardy. So what did I learn? Well, the reality is you learn the reality outside of school. So you know, there's a textbook smart, and then there's the reality, the life experiences, that lived experience. And so as you progress in your field, you're going to learn new things. You're going to be exposed to new experiences. That's by default. However, some of the things that I wish I was better equipped with while I was in my program before I graduated was, what do I do with my degree after I graduate? And make sure you're asking these questions early on. It's beyond your internship. Internships are great because there are opportunities for you to possibly become employed through them, right? But the reality is, like, I didn't know what to do about this whole licensing. Like, I was new to New York to begin with. So this whole licensing issue and what about the exam, I didn't really know that. And quite honestly, it took me a while to figure that out. And then it took me a while to figure out, you know, that I needed supervision for my clinical hours, which is why there was some delay in me working towards my clinical. And that's okay, but that's time lost, especially since I have a student loan. And so also reach out to your financial aid department, find out what you qualify for in terms of loan forgiveness, or even with the New York State, I know that they have some different programs as well, and aside from the typical loan forgiveness, and see what you qualify for. Look at your opportunities, ask questions, ask what are your opportunities, if there's any grants and scholarships that can help cover your educational expenses while you're doing the program, but make sure you're asking questions about what next, what about graduation, what happens post-graduation. Advice for the students who are preparing to enter the field: go with the flow. Like find the field that you're interested in, or find a field that you might have interest in, and just know that it's okay if you change. You don't have to stay stuck if you're not happy, because there is burnout. So one of the things that I will say is that community care is so important. So if you can be a part of NESW, for example, where you can talk to social workers who are
Did Naja freeze for you all? Okay. Let's give her a second. Okay, so we'll let her finish that thought when she becomes unfrozen. So we will move on to, because that was a really good answer. She was on a roll there. Alyssa, we'll move on to you. So what have you learned in the field that you didn't learn in school, and what advice do you have for students?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing that I didn't learn in school, and I think Naja was starting to, or had already talked about it, was just the textbook versus the real life. So learning how to work with so many different individuals, learning about different cultures, different backgrounds, seeing how everything is interacting and coming together in the world. You just don't get enough experience, even in my internships, which I felt were pretty diverse. I think it was very different moving into community mental health and just seeing how all these systems and people work together and don't work together, unfortunately, too, in some situations. I am also a field educator through UB School of Social Work. So I have been doing that for the last couple of years. I think the biggest area was the second question about students preparing to enter the field. Is just taking your time. We talk about this a lot in supervision because I think there's this rush to get to your end goal, whether it's like you want to start a private practice or you want to write a textbook or you want to do all this research, but really just like take your time. It's okay to start off with a case management position. In my opinion, you probably should start off with a very lower level social work job just to gain the skills, learn how systems interact, work together, learn about as many different people as you can, find a mentor, get good supervision. So I think that all has to start with a really solid foundation and then being able to move on to those goals. And it's also okay if your goals change along the way because you might find a different niche or area of social work and be okay with that. So don't rush the process.
Thank you, Alyssa. Great answers. We did have a question I just want to address quickly. What about continuing school after your MSW? I've actually worked with a lot of students around this issue. And what I tell them is, why? Why are you continuing school? What is your end goal? I just worked with one of our former interns that she's like, I think I want to get a master's in public health. And I said, why? And she told me what her career goal was. I was like, you don't need it. The social work degree covers you in this area. So you want to make sure before you take out more loans and go to more school that the social work degree covers so many areas because we're so broad. You may not need another degree, but definitely do your continuing ed because that's a place to learn more. That's where those trainings, professional development, that's where you can grow. Okay, Melody. So what have you learned in the field that you didn't learn in school, and what advice do you have for the students?
So I think what happened in college was that I was able to embrace the absolute geek that I am. So that is not like a pretty background. Those are my books. That's Indigenous research, Indigenous curricula. That's many, many voices from many places. And I love that. And that's something I learned in school, was about embracing my passion of reading and theory. And I also learned a lot about research that I did not have as in my undergrad. Now I wasn't a BSW, but as my MSW, it was Berkeley, which is very much a research school. And I learned a lot about, is it valid? Who are they studying? Just great questions to ask that I still use to this day. So what happened is, because, it's been a few decades since I've had my degree. So let me tell you, it's a whole new world out there. So in the field for the last few decades, I learned how to better myself. So I just threw up my hands over here when June, you mentioned community-based participatory research. That word hadn't been really strung together or used at all a few decades ago. And so learning about that, there's something called Indigenous data sovereignty, which is about who creates and stores information for tribes and research for tribes, who even asks what question. And, so all of these things have happened since I graduated in the field. So I think that, my college was a lovely little foundation to become much more informed when I am in the field. Because I have been doing social work for so many years, I've been on the ground running for decades now and in the community. So that's about the field for me. Advice, I thought about this. I actually tried to write a few different things out. And I think the thing that really comes out is create different spaces for social work. You do not, and no offense, one of my colleagues just said it about taking a case management job, I would actually encourage you not to take a case management job. I would encourage you to look elsewhere. There are so many different spaces for social work to be practiced under, you know, businesses. I met some people in Revolutionize that recent graduates that created their own businesses to promote their unique way of doing social work in the world. Consider mutual aid, consider collectives. You know, there are many different ways to practice social work, and there's many different spaces to do it in. So, you know, I would urge you to take that healthy risk, you know, look for something out of that box in social work. There's many areas, and they need us. They need those voices. So that's the biggest thing. And in alignment with that, I would also ask you to consider looking at programs that aren't dependent on grants. And I think that's super important. Grants come and grants go, but the work we provide to community should be consistent. So I would consider you to look at spaces or create spaces that are not dependent on a funder with a different agenda than yourself, or looking at grants. So I am asking you to kind of expand where and how you consider social work is. By the way, local politics is a great place for social work. So consider that too.
Melody, awesome answer, of course. And I just want to comment on what you said. I ran grants for years. I run one here. I ran one before I came here. And our job as social workers are to let the funders know what the grant is actually about, because they'll have an idea of what it's about. And it usually has nothing to do with the work you're actually doing. So we're the ones with the skill set to say, I know that you're saying it's about this, but this is what we're actually doing with it. And then you convince them as to why it's the better way to run the grant. That's what part of our skill set is, that we could do that. And we could talk to people and legislators and the funders about that. So we direct that, right? So I'm glad you brought that up. That was a really good point. And Cecily, I have to keep reading the question because I keep forgetting it. What have you learned in the field that you didn't learn in school, and what advice do you have for the students?
Great, thank you. So I'll try to keep this brief. I think that, you know, similar, it was probably already spoken about before. Some other folks already uplifted it, but there's a few other things that I will uplift. You know, I talked about the reality of secondary trauma, burnout, compassion fatigue. These are things that we talked about throughout our time this evening. I can't say, you know, I really cannot stress that enough, that I really wish I would have learned a little bit more about that in school. I thought it was just me. We didn't talk about that in school, right? In my program, I don't think I really talked about and knew what secondary trauma was. And I really, when I got into the field and was experiencing burnout, I didn't even know what it was. I didn't have the language for it. And I thought it was me. I thought it was an individual thing, that somehow I was a problem or couldn't make it or something. And I realized, you know, over time that, no, this is not just me. Obviously, this is a systemic issue. So really, I wish I would have learned that. So that goes into one of my, you know, advice is really having those spaces of community care. We talked about that before. The self-care is important, right? Knowing what you need to do to take care of yourself, knowing what you need to do to kind of get yourself back to baseline if you're really under a lot of stress, knowing your stress levels, that's important, but also having the community. I cannot stress enough the importance of having a community. I really wish I would have learned that in school. The other thing I wish I would have learned in school that I learned in the field, unfortunately, the hard way, is how to advocate for yourself, right? In school, we learn a lot about how to advocate for clients, right? We do a lot of that. But the advocacy, and I think we talked about that, right? Making sure that we're paid equitably, making sure that we are getting paid what we deserve, making sure that we're getting the recognition and having a seat at the table that we need to have seats at. I didn't learn how to actually advocate for myself in a way that, you know, that I realized that I needed to. So that's another piece. And again, we talked about this before. MSWs reinforce this false dichotomy between macro and micro clinical practice. You know, like you have to choose tracks, and then it kind of seems that never the two shall meet. As we have seen throughout this entire time this evening, the reality of social work is much more nuanced than that. And so really, to be an effective social worker, to truly embody the values of the profession, we spoke about this before, you have to have an appreciation for and at least some baseline skills in both. So now just a little bit of some advice that I have. Probably this is already spoken about. Know yourself, know where you're best suited and what fills you up, right? So social workers can practice in many different areas, can practice, that's the beauty of social work, right? That's what we've been saying all evening. It's really, so know what brings you joy. Is it direct day-to-day contact with individuals? Is it working with groups, or is it communities, or is it more macro research, policy, large scale advocacy? So really, what is it that you're most passionate about? What social issues are you most passionate about? And what is your point of connection? Where do you have direct experience that you can draw from that connects you to that issue? And what are your skills, right? Are you a good writer? Are you really good at listening and being actually like, you know, a counselor to folks? Or, you know, do you want to educate? Do you want to, you know, or do you want to go into policy and, you know, in the political arena? So really, where are your skills? Where's your point of connection? And what are you passionate about? And then once you have those three, really being able to put that together. And that's the beauty of social work, is that you can do all of that. Again, micro, macro, meso, they're all part of the same thing. It's not separate. You know, always just remember that the individual issues that you're seeing always have roots in larger systemic issues, and that larger systemic issues directly impact and affect individuals in their everyday lives. Specifically, I want to offer some advice, you know, for being grounded in anti-racist practice. Again, having community, so important. As a Black woman embraced and deeply steeped in this work, having other Black social workers, mentors, is supremely important for me. Otherwise, I could not do this work. So that, I just want to say that, have your community, know your space. Always remember your why. Why do you do this work? And remember, take care of yourself, you know. And yeah, and also I just want to say, if you don't have it all figured out, it's okay. It's okay if you don't have a polished, detailed 5 or 10-year plan, or if things don't go as planned, it's okay. It's going to be okay. Just remember, things are always in process. Embrace the journey. You never know when a path that you thought was not for you, or a job that you think is a waste, will come into play in the future. Always see possibilities, connections. They're everywhere if you know how to look for them. So that is what I will say. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Cecily. Excellent answer. We do have a couple of questions for the panel in the chat, if you all want to look at those. And June. So June, let me repeat the question because I keep forgetting it. What have you learned in the field that you didn't learn in school, and what advice do you have for the students?
So what I would say, what I didn't learn in school was how our social work curricula really needs to be challenged and changed, and how our systems need to be dismantled and rebuilt. And I really, really wish I had learned that, and I'm learning how to teach that. And so in terms of what advice I would have, I would say embrace, and I think Cicely, you talked a little bit about this, but embrace not knowing. It's okay to not know. And in fact, it's important to let go of the idea that you're the expert, right? So we need to trust that the people that we work with and the communities that we work with know what's best for them. And so we need to recognize our role is very often as allies and advocates, right? And then we also need to challenge the profession to be better. So I would say that do that. You deserve to do that. Our clients, communities need to have that, right? So they deserve to have us challenge the profession. And it's one of our responsibilities. So I would say, don't ever forget that piece of it.
Thank you, June. And Sylas, you started us off, you're wrapping us up. What have you learned in the field, and what advice do you have for our students?
Start by saying ditto, 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 ditto. Everybody was really wonderful with their answers. And as I was sitting here listening to everybody give their responses, and I was thinking about, what I was going to share. What I learned in the field that I didn't learn in school was how much I didn't learn in school, first and foremost. I learned a lot of things in the field that were never covered and were never taught. And, when we talk about a white supremacy, a racist viewpoint and lens, I was so focused on in school, learning the techniques and the modalities and the language, I was just kind of like focusing on that. And then when I graduated and I got into the field, and then I started like hearing, like workshops and doing more research and listening to other speakers, I realized like, wow, they didn't, they never said anything about this in school. And so, my biggest takeaway from being in the field was that I realized that coming into social work, because I went to school after being out for quite a while, and coming into social work, I never realized while I was in school how much my life experience played a part in the social worker that I was evolving into. And I never realized that my past experiences, had already shaped me to be a social worker before I ever took my first formal course. So it's very affirming to know that once I got in the field and I started realizing that my whole viewpoint about social work had been shaped, and molded from my experience. I'm actually a product of the system. I came through the foster care system. Social work was a part of my life since I was like 2 years old. So I didn't realize then and through my years how much that would play a part in who I am today as a social worker, because I didn't really make those connections in school. But once I got out, I realized that a lot of, I learned the formal terminology about a lot of things, but, I already had the concepts because I had actually lived those experiences. And also, I never realized how impactful social work was while I was in school, because I wasn't thinking about social work as being a product of the system. I was thinking about social work as being a student. And then when I got out, I realized that, hey, everything that I've been through really prepared me for this position as a social worker. And I came to the profession having an experience and having experiences about the impact that social work can make. And that kind of codified my real strong belief in the profession. So I didn't realize in school how impactful social work was until I got out. And then I made the connection between my past experience and what I learned in school. And I never made those two connections until I got out. And as far as advice for students, wow, that's so much, so much I could say. While you're in school, stay involved, certainly with NASW. I can tell students that if you're not a member, you need to join today, maybe even yesterday. If you start as a bachelor student, you can maintain as long as you maintain steady membership, that whatever that rate is, it follows you through to your master's. And if you continue to maintain your membership when you graduate, I think it's a 2 year, maybe 3 year transitional rate before you go to the professional rate. The other thing is, as a student, doors are open to you as a student that won't be open to you as much or as wide once you graduate. Because see, while you're a student, you're not really a threat to anybody. So when you're on your internship, ask a lot of questions, talk to a lot of professional social workers, attend a lot of conferences, and interact with people from different areas of practice so you can figure out what it is that you really like. And one thing I learned that I'll pass on, whatever you think you like or whatever you came into social work that you want to do something different while you're in the field. So if you want to do mental health, that's fine, but get a social work assignment as a geriatric social worker or a substance abuse social worker, or working in community care or child care. Why? Because it opens up your mind to all the different possibilities, and you'll never know what it is that might pique your interest, and you'll find one day yourself saying, oh, gee, I didn't know I really like that. So whatever you like to do something different. And then the last thing is, as a member, as a student, you have the opportunity to apply for many scholarships. There's also some fellowships, that you can look into on the national level. But most importantly, you get to become part of a community of professionals who are caring, who are knowledgeable, and you'll always be able to find someone to mentor you along the way. So as a student, talk to as many professionals as you can, go to as many workshops, look into as many, and also, if you get a chance to present at the conferences, whether it's a poster or do a presentation, or you want to partner with one of your professors, really great experience, helps get you exposure. So those are some of the things that I would say to students as far as going through the profession and training to be a social worker.
I promise I did not pay anyone to say to join an ASW. But I do appreciate you say that, because we're all about building a very diverse organization. And the team members at NASW, we always say that our job is to build a stage and invite you on the stage to speak. Because we, as you can tell, they learned way more from you all than they would have learned from me. So I want to thank you for doing that. I want to just address one last question, and then we'll wrap up for this evening. This was a wonderful panel. Someone was asking about continuing ed. In New York State, you do not need continuing education. You don't need it for your license until after your first registration period. So for an LMSW, that gives you 3 years. And when you get your LCSW, you don't need it for another 3 years. Now, that being said, as a member benefit, all of our student members and all of our transitional members who don't need the continuing ed, you can go to all of our continuing ed for free. Because we want you to be, social work is a career that evolves. We want it to evolve. You've heard that all night tonight, that the way that social work currently is not acceptable. We need the profession to evolve, and we need it to evolve quicker than it is. So continuing ed is one of those ways in which we evolve the profession. So we want you going to that continuing ed, even when you don't need it for your license. So for the New York State members, student or transitional, all our CE is free for you. Now for our full members, we offer free CEs every month for you. They're always in our anti-racism series, and sometimes we'll throw a couple of extra ones in there. And for our paid programs, we only charge $10 per CE, and it's the lowest rate I have found, and we've kept it there as a member benefit. So I wanted to just answer that question. And I see that this panel was incredibly popular and important for everyone. So we'll make sure we schedule something like this again, maybe in the fall. And all night I've been putting links into how you can connect with us and go to free programming. So I hope that you join us with our other initiatives. You've learned a lot about what we do. You've learned a lot about the profession. And I have to give just my wholehearted thanks to all of our panelists who were absolutely amazing. And I'm like Melody, I'm a little selfish. I do this for me. So I want to thank you for everything I've learned from you tonight. So thank you all. And I see some hand claps. So let's just give everyone a hand clap and thank our panelists for giving to us tonight. And hopefully tonight we've worked to evolve the profession some more. So thank you. Join us later in the month for our free programs. And I hope to see you all soon.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right.